Hello and welcome to episode 227 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco, and if this is your first time joining us on Page One, we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry, and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we've had some really fantastic guests in the past, so please do go and check out our back catalogue if you haven't already, because there's bound to be some that you're interested in hearing from. Just as I'm sure you're interested in hearing from this week's brilliant guest, who is Michael Cordy, who first had success way back in 1997 with his debut novel, The Miracle Strain, also known as The Messiah Code, which was published in over 25 languages and reached the top 5 in the Sunday Times Bestseller List, with Disney buying the film rights for $1.6 million, which is, you know, the dream debut sort of book that many people are after. So we chat to him about that, about how that came about. He basically took time off work to focus on writing that, with the serious intent of giving writing a go, and obviously it worked out very, very well for him. Since then, he wrote many other books, although he has recently been on a break from writing books. He was drawn by the lure of the Hollywood sirens and was trying to get projects off the ground there, but has come back to writing with his most recent book, Manhattan Down, which has been getting some fantastic reviews. So yeah, it's a really broad-ranging and fun chat with Michael, who was a really great guest. So we'll get straight into it after a quick advert for a writer's notebook. But before we do, I do want to remind people that we have a Patreon. You can support us on the Patreon. You can even join for free and just join our Discord for some chat with us and other listeners and authors. But there are various different tiers you can back us at, and you get early access to these episodes. You can get video access to these episodes, even if they're not video episodes. You get access or timed exclusive access to our drafting notes, and we've started a new benefit, which is a Patreon exclusive benefit, which is that we get our guests to hang around and tell us about 5 books that have influenced them. So yeah, you get that on there as well. So please do go and check out the Patreon. The link's in the podcast description. But we'll get straight into the podcast now, and I'll be back at the end of the podcast with a bit more chat. The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with Page One.
I always like to start the podcast with an easy question. It's easy for me because I know what the question is. It's the same question for everyone. Which is, did you always want to be a writer?
No, that's a good question, because I didn't want to be a writer, but I wanted to tell stories.
Right.
So, for example, I never had an aspiration to have on my gravestone sort of brilliant writer, and I suspect I never will. But to be somebody who's written stories that people really enjoyed, and there was some nuggets in them which were ethically and intellectually interesting, brilliant. But so I've always loved telling stories, but not particularly wanted to be a writer. If that,
Right.
But obviously, writing is the means to do it, rather than necessarily the objective in itself. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I understand what you're saying there. I mean, I suppose then the follow-up question is, when did you start to realize that one method of doing that would be to write these down and let other people read them?
I think when I realised it might be a commercial proposition, i.e., making money out of it. If you look at it from a sort of, people talk about purpose and all this business, and you want to do something that is you love, and you want to do something that leaves the world in a better place. You want to do something that you're good at, and ideally, you want to do something that you can make some money out of, so you can actually keep doing it. And that element was always not a thing. Although I love telling stories, and I would bore my family on long car journeys and stuff. It only happened when I was actually at work, and I had this idea, and also there was this element of I had a sort of an epiphany that the job I was doing, which was in marketing and advertising, was telling stories, because brands don't exist. I mean, in the same way that Ian Fleming's books exist and Daniel Craig exists, James Bond doesn't. An iPhone exists, a computer exists, but Apple doesn't. It's just a construct, an emotional bundle of things, a character, if you will. And I suddenly realized that it was kind of, so when I made this leap from marketing and advertising, the commercial world, into writing a big story, my terror was somewhat abated by the fact that I had done something not entirely non-contiguous to this. Because otherwise there was no reason to do it, apart from my wife saying, go for it, take a year out and have a go, and I have faith in you. And I'm going, but why? Because I have shown nothing which would indicate this is valid, apart from as a child telling stories. But no, I'd love to say, I won the X Prize at university and stuff, but I did dabble and did plays, but no real empirical evidence to suggest that this was a sensible thing to do, except for the passion to do it. That was it, really.
Well, I mean, the first novel that you put out was The Messiah Code in 1997. Was that the same novel that you took time off work to start writing? Was it the first novel you tried to write?
Yeah. What I had to do is that because I took it really seriously, like it was a business proposition. I mean, I don't want to sort of make the artistic and the sort of creative bit down, because it wasn't. It was all about having the passion to do it. But I needed to build in some kind of a rationale to allow myself to do it. So I had this idea in my head of, all my stories start with an idea normally. And it was, what if you could find a sample of Christ's DNA? What would you find there? Would you finally put to rest the whole issue about him being the Son of God? Or would you find, the genes of God? And at one level, it's a preposterous nonsense. But another level, there was a genuinely interesting element in it. And then I had this story idea about, what if you were some atheist scientist who had to find something extraordinary because nothing else worked and he knew everything? How would you go beyond science and go into faith to try and find this thing? So I had my sort of version of the quest for the Holy Grail thing. And this idea would not go away. I was on holiday in Bermuda and I wouldn't go on the beach. I would just stay and work, and this silly idea. And then when I went to work, Jenny just said, for God's sake, just get it out of your system. Take 1 year off, then go back to work. Just take a year off, get it out of your system. And she and I wrote this contract. It's quite sweet on our fridge. It's honestly true. So I wrote, I must save up X amount of pounds. I must walk her to the station every day as my commute and walk her back from the tube. But she said, look, we'll fly on one engine for a year. We're not going to be, chucked out of our home. We might not be able to go skiing. So let's not get too over, concerned about this. But I had to get up and all these things we committed to. And then I began it. And then I began the process of writing my first novel. But the core point of all this for me about telling stories is that 1 year in, I had what Eric Morecambe would have said, all the right words, but not necessarily in the right order. So I had this. So I had finished something, but I could tell, even with my untrained eye and somebody who reads a lot, this wasn't yet good enough, And I felt quite low, and I suddenly thought, perhaps this is over. And one of my friends, when I'd first left, given up my company car and done all this business, had said to me, you have as much chance of getting published as of striking oil in Surrey, unless you have an agent or something else. And I said, well, I don't know. But the weird thing was, there was this long weekend after my year was up, when I gave to Jenny my sort of garbled Meisterwerk. And that weekend, I read this book about storytelling, The Hero's Journey, the sort of Joseph Campbell and all the stuff that we all know. But I didn't really know it. I had sort of one of those things you go, yeah, I kind of know it. And that weekend was a crucial weekend because Jenny comes back and says, it's not awful. It's actually quite good. And I said, let me guess, structure. Because I had read that weekend this, and I suddenly realized, this is how you tell a story, a long form story. Mm-hmm. This is not a guy in a pub saying this happened and then that happened and then this was the resolution. This is a long version of that, the marathon. And there are certain way stations in it. I thought, God, I think I can apply this to what I've done. And I realized, I looked at my own story in that light, and I realized I had got my ordinary weld, and I'd left Kansas by giving up my car, and I'd had these troubles. I found it really difficult. I'd got my ordeal, and then I went away and I got an agent, and eventually and it all worked out. And a guy rang me up and said, they've struck oil in Dorking. And I remember thinking, hey, result. But then I came when I back, and then I finished this book after 2 years, not one. But then we got an agent, and we went to Frankfurt Book Fair, and it was silly. I mean, we got, I don't know, loads of countries, languages. We got a Disney film deal. It was life-changing stuff. Mm-hmm. So from a sort of like, your dream is dead, it was like a story, dream is dead halfway through. And then, you know, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. And then you come back from that moment of like ordeal, and you have your return, you get your sword, you get your treasure, you come back, have your resurrection, your final battle is at Frankfurt Book Fair when you win, inverted commas, and you get all these, and then all of a sudden your elixir is, you go into a shop and there's your book, and you go into the bestseller lists and there's your book, and you go, this is ridiculous. So that is the story of my first story, if you like.
And do you think, we've spoken to many, many authors on this podcast, and obviously you need to write the book, you need to find the agent and all of that sort of stuff. But there is also definitely, it seems, an element of serendipity, of timing, of luck.
Absolutely.
You were telling a story at that time that I think was the right type of story. Maybe publishers were excited about that type of story at that time. Is that fair to say?
I think so. Although I think I would argue that I was a bit before my time.
Right, okay.
Because a character called Dan Brown came along about 5 years later with a book called Da Vinci Code, and which helped my book. I mean, it was actually originally called The Miracle Strain. There's no surprise it was called The Messiah Code, because that was the publisher going, well, let's cash in on this code business.
Yeah.
I drew the line at changing my name to Michael Cordy, but it was kind of it was that kind of moment. Talk about luck and serendipity. When there's a sort of wave, people jump on it. But I think the Human Genome Project was just ending, which is why I wrote it, because there was all this stuff about this notion about what happens if wasn't silly, because you could actually do it. You could actually, if you could find a sample of Christ's DNA, you could actually look at it. How would you find it? Well, actually, they just found DNA remains from some ancient civilization in South America. So 2,000-year-old stuff could still be viable. So all these sort of nuggets of fact could underpin this stream of fantasy. And then you realize you have a story here. And so there's a lot of timing work, both in terms of scientific development, real things happening. I remember when I went to America to do some talks, I would be interviewed by or somebody would join the conversation who was a gene scientist, and which was ridiculous, because I'm just telling a story here, but there was enough grit in it, a bit like Michael Crichton talking about Jurassic Park, which was I had read before this, and that gave me the sort of, you can go this far, can you? So yes, absolutely.
Yep. And as you say, that first book, The Messiah Code, that was a big success. As you said, I think it was number 5, Sunday Times. Got the film rights sold by Disney, etc. So, really that a really big splash when it came out, and I wondered what kind of impact that had on you going forward. You know, you kind of you were given it a first go, and then suddenly your first book does amazingly well. What did that mean for you for your book 2, book 3?
To be really honest, it was quite tricky because I'd like to say, it was, I expected it and all great, but actually it was kind of a benign trauma in the sense that for my creative process, and I don't want to ask for you to go, oh, you poor bloke, but what I mean is, what I mean is that there was an element of, because my joke with Jenny was, if I get published and I make a penny, I won't be laughed out of court when I go back to work. That was kind of our table stakes. Yeah. That was the sort of so when you get this ridiculously successful thing, by my terms, you kind of go, well, the difficult second album rears its head. There's an element of that to it. But also I remember feeling like, perhaps I'll be found out now. Perhaps I just got very lucky once. But I always wanted to sort of tell stories. So I was given advice by, that's the most important thing, to keep going. Because the advice I was given by an agent in America was just write a second book. And I met Lee Child later, and he said something along the lines of, whenever he finishes a book, he starts his next one. And there's an element of keep going, the shark mentality. If you keep going, you'll survive. Don't think about it too much, and don't, for God's sake, rest on your laurels or think, I've arrived, because you haven't. You just tick the first box. Now carry on. And to answer your question, everything changed. But I had to try and keep the core of it, the engine of it, intact, and use the self-confidence elements of it. I can do this, people like it, and not get overwhelmed by the other stuff about what does this really mean? It means nothing, Mike. It just means you got a book and you got lucky. Your earlier question, Marco, about there's amount of luck involved. You've got to have a really healthy respect for providence and really want to write the books. I think that's the thing for me. I learned then, and it come back to me now, because it's been a bit of a journey since then, about trust in the work. All the other stuff is noise, and that can really set you the wrong way if you're not careful. Does that answer the question?
I think it does. And you said that there was that you had that weekend that was sort of revelationary as in terms of reading the writer's journey and stuff. I wondered what obviously you explained a bit about the change that made to your thinking about structure and things like that. But I mean, are you someone now, did that fundamentally change how you write? Do you now write in a different way? Do you plan out your novels before you start writing it? Or do you have this idea that you said that you begin with and explore it? Are you a big planner?
I think I'm a bit of both. What I've learnt, the point of that weekend, and I remember after that doing all these post-it notes, this wall behind me, it's a sort of stick-up wall. I remember having all these post-it notes up there for one of my later books, because I just wanted to make sure I did it, because I view it like a yachtsman, I think, is that if I want to get to, let's say I want to get to South America, down to Chile, how do I get there? I'll go via the Azores, I'll go to Florida, come out to Bermuda, go down to Jamaica and go, perhaps I'll do that. And so I need to know my way. So I need to know where my Northern Star is and the elements to it. And I will plan it to an extent. I'll get out of something like Scrivener, and I will actually put them into different pockets so that I don't get lost, because it's long form again. This is a tricky thing about novels, I think, is that in the middle bit, you can get very lost because all of a sudden the options get bigger, not less, which is what shouldn't happen. But you should allow some options. But then how I get to these places, I like to leave a bit to chance, because you don't want to write a book you've already read. There's some people, I know some people who plan it to the nth degree, and I'm impressed on the one hand. On the other hand, I'm a little bit like, but how do you have the juice to get up there and actually write the damn thing? It's quite tricky.
No, I'm the exact same as you. I want that kind of, I want to be excited and as I'm writing it, not and as I'm planning it, and then bored when I'm actually coming to actually write the thing.
Well, that's it, because you do have some actors I've spoke to have said things like, the British actors say when they do a table read with American actors, all of them are really flat. These brilliant actors are going like, that I want to say to you, my love, I adore you, or something. And the British guys are giving it all. And then when it comes to the camera, they're like, bam. And it's like, wow. And he said, I asked this guy, and he said, well, no, I want to keep it. I don't want to use it up now.
That's interesting. Okay,
That's knowing it. That's not knowing. That's not feeling it.
It's funny because I've definitely heard directors say something similar about when they're doing rehearsals and stuff, or about not wanting to push their actors to get the best. They want to wait for the moment to try and get the best out of their actors.
Save a bit,
Save it, exactly. Yeah, that's interesting to think about that. Okay, like that.
Yeah, because I think that. So I agree with you, Tarek. I think there's an element of I like to keep a bit of magic because I want to know what's going to happen next a bit. I know what's going to happen eventually, but I want to know how you're going to get there. Because otherwise it's a bit dull.
And then if you're kind of plotting as you write, as you explore it, does that mean that your first draft needs a bit more editing? Like it's a bit rougher.
Yeah. I think the way I put it, and somebody else said this to me once, and I thought that's really true. Is I think your first draft you write to yourself. Your first draft is telling yourself the story. This is what happens. Then when you want to tell someone else a story, storytelling in my mind is about what you don't tell you yet. So it's about what I hold back from you. It's about how I maximize that twist or that revelation. And your first draft, you're just telling yourself it. So it's a bit, and this happened and that happened, and then he felt this and she felt that, and oh my gosh, and that was a surprise. And it's very much, it's more tell rather than show. Yeah. But the second time, and the third time, if you have to finesse it, there are elements of the craft of it. Like even in the new book, Manhattan Down, there was a scene when a character comes back as kind of half surprised, and I had given more information then than I wanted to. And when I read the draft, even just after Bill at Transworld had got the book, I remember thinking, oh, no, the last bit of that, I'm going to put 3 chapters later because I don't want you to know that yet.
Yeah.
And just that little thing like that makes a huge difference. But you can't do that until you rewrite. You can't get to that until you've done a few iterations for yourself, I think.
It's interesting though, because I am someone, and I know we've had other guests as well that have said the same thing. If there is something that they get in their head about something they've written, that you get to a point and then you think, wait, this isn't going to work because I need to change that and that. And they sort of, it kind of acts as a block. They feel that they need to go back to fix that bit before they can then move forward. Whereas other people will just say, okay, I'll fix that, but I'm going to push forward on the basis that will be fixed now, sort of a thing.
I was told something by a software developer once, which helped me, who writes code, which is kind of a different sort of storytelling, if you like. And I said exactly that. I said, sometimes I get to a bit and I really want to get it. I want to sort it out because I think this is going to be a joist upon which everything else will rest. And it's really important. And he was very clear-headed and just said, look, but if it's really important, then you've got to sort it. If it's a sort of fundamental strategic, which informs everything else, well, obviously, but that's kind of your story. You should know that before you start, really. Yeah. If it's not, if it's a question of there are 3 or 4 different routes to go, you're not quite sure which it is, you can either soldier on, or you can do the third option, which I found quite interesting, is go later on, to cut out, let's say, go to your next nodal point, just start there and just write on, and then write backwards. And that's quite interesting. So you create, because back to the way station analogy, I now want to get to the Azores. So like finding Bermuda, went to Bermuda, find Azores tricky, go straight to Bermuda, get from Bermuda so-and-so, and then, I could do this back then. And suddenly you can sort of reverse engineer stuff. It doesn't always work, but that sometimes unblocks me, I find.
It's funny. You almost have to trick your brain into coming up with the answer.
I think that is what writing is. I think it's all self-deception. Even to start the idea that I'm going to write this 110,000 words about nothing and expect people to bother to read it and even pay me money for it. It's the first ridiculous concept.
Well, you mentioned it just there, but your latest novel is Manhattan Down. So why don't you tell us what that book's about?
If I may, can I give you a bit of background about how it began, the sort of genesis? Because first of all, I'd written six books after the Messiah Code, and the last one was about 12 years ago. And for some weird reason, I sort of dried up a bit. My dad had just died. I think that was linked to it. And nothing particularly traumatic. He was of a certain age, etc., etc. But to me, I think talking about stuff around the writing and don't think about overthink stuff, I think I did a bit. And there was a siren call from Hollywood. I had 4 books that were in development, which is an awful way of saying nothing happening. And but there was a chance of getting involved in that. And then, so anyway, cut to 10, 11 years later, I've done some work on Hollywood. I'd kind of written a novel, but it was really dark. And I think it was linked to other stuff, and I didn't like it. So I didn't really go to anybody with it. But then the pandemic hit, and I was running in the park, and I had this weird epiphany, a bit like, going around that story thing again. You have your dark moment, and then you have that moment when you go, oh. And an awful time for most people, but it was one of those weird mornings running around the park, and suddenly looking up, there was no planes in the sky, there was no road noise, all very quiet. And I had this link up with this idea of what happens if you're in Manhattan doing this and everyone was asleep. And it was the city that never sleeps. And I just read a book called The Family That Couldn't Sleep, a non-fiction book about a genuine prion disease that people have. And it was a horrible, shocking thing. But like all jackdaws with storytelling, you take those weird things and you go, I can use that. And as I was writing, I had this weird epiphany about that. Anyway, that gave me ideas about sleep. I imagined climate change, pandemic, the world stopping for a pause. Everyone's in hibernation. They'll come out again. Perhaps they'll reset. Perhaps. Ran back. Told Jenny this other story I have, which I'm now writing now, but I had this big idea for a story. It's too unwieldy. I'm going to do this. I'm just going to go and do it. And that began it. And then because of the pandemic, I didn't have my normal distractions. And perhaps you found the same, but you actually had to sit down and write because you couldn't go out and play tennis or have a coffee or have a beer. It was because you're stuck with your lovely family, but going, I've got to do something. I may as well write. And it really helped for me. So I had this guilty admission that I actually had, it was quite productive time. So did all that, got to a stage where, and the book's about, again, you have the idea, then the story comes second. I think you've got to have this, because ideas I find really easy. I find the tough bit is finding why they have meaning and what the story is.
Yeah.
But so I had this story idea about, imagine if all the world leaders were gathered together for a climate conference at the UN on the anniversary of 9/11, coincidentally. And all the COP stuff has been going on, and it's in the news now. We could argue there's been no progress at all, really. Yeah. And they're finally going to have to do something about it. And New York is under a current heat dome, which I never heard of until about 3 or 4 years ago, where the temperature is the highest it's ever been, and they're all committing to do something finally. But then at 5:25 p.m. that day, everyone on Manhattan Island collapses. Just like when I was doing my run, imagine everyone around you is just gone. Just whether they're in a coma, whether they're asleep, whether they're dead, no one knows at this stage, including every world leader at the UN. So like the world is on the brink with no leaders. I thought this is quite interesting. And one of my characters in it has this disease or this failing, which I was reading about. I thought, oh, that's quite good. Imagine somebody who's been given really bad news, but then for a moment in time, it makes them immune. It gives them a kind of short-term superpower. What would they do with that? And they've got a daughter to find. And so they basically focused on finding their daughter in Manhattan, because behind them in Brooklyn, people are awake and alive. It's just Manhattan. And at the same time, an injured New York cop who has been in a coma for things we now realize might be linked to this, wakes up just as the city's falling into one, and he has to try and work out what's going on because it's his job. So there's him and her, and they eventually meet up, and then they have to try and work together to solve whatever is going on Manhattan. And that's really the story by a certain time, because have you heard of the survival rule of threes? I love this.
No, not heard of
this. There's apparently there's a survival rule of threes is that if you don't get any oxygen for three minutes, you're dead. If you're in a really hostile environment like the North Sea for I think 3 hours, you're dead. If you haven't got any drink with you for 3 days, you're dead. And if you don't eat for 3 weeks, you're dead. So there's these kind of three things.
Okay.
I mean, obviously everyone's different.
Yeah.
But there was there was this element that it's a rule of three, and so they had 3 days now to sort this out because really hot, dehydration, people are asleep, people will start dying. Those who haven't died by virtue of falling off whatever. And so I thought, this is interesting. And the more you have this idea, the more you think it's preposterous. You talk to people and you find out things like the rule of threes. You find out, and I had to try and find a way to make this happen because obviously, how does it happen? And then I found out this other thing, which is real.
Yeah.
And I'm going, oh gosh, because that's what I find. People say about write what you know, but I find interestingly, write what you want to know, because then you learn stuff. Like the earlier thing about you don't want to know everything because you don't want to read a book you've already written. Write a book you've already read a book you've already written. I've already read. Sorry, there's an element of doing a research specifically to make something happen that doesn't yet exist, and you'll find that it does exist because some millionaire somewhere, or some billionaire somewhere, some scientist has got the same idea and is trying to make it happen, and they've got halfway, and then that's all you need.
Exactly.
You can do that bit of the graph, and then you can go across the ice with that, and it'll hold.
Yeah,
it'll hold. Yeah.
And obviously, it's been a big hit. I think it's fair to say since launch. It's got amazing reviews everywhere, and
so far great. Yeah.
We talked about this slightly before we started recording, but I mean, was there a sense of relief after being not publishing your last book back in 2011? I think it was. So I mean, was there
on so many levels?
Yeah.
The first level is just approaching your agent and approaching your publisher after that long, because they were start off, they're asking you questions, you'll say I'm doing film stuff, which didn't happen. So that was really frustrating. There was a slight concern to myself that have I lost the thing I can do, this sort of idea stuff that and when you interrogate it too closely, it is nonsense, but it is wonderful nonsense, and you have to sort of it makes no sense is what I mean. So when I wrote this book and I was really excited about it or anything else, I told myself, it's fine, it's great, it'll be okay, I'll get published. And Jenny, my wife's brilliant, and my daughter was fantastically sort of supportive, and she has loads of ideas. She's constantly giving me stuff to look at and understand. So I felt, in my little bubble, I felt fine. I felt like this is really good, but you all know that is great in your head, but when you let somebody else into the greenhouse to see your fragile plant, even the gust of wind that comes in can kill it dead. But then, so my first moment of was ringing up my agent and saying, I've got this new book, and I kept really quiet about it, and it was then called Somnopolis, the City of Sleep, and I had this, and he said, well, read it and stuff, and he said, my line was, just tell me it's not crap. Just tell me it's not bad, and then because I can work on not bad, I can work with that. He said, no, it's fine, it's good. There's some things you have to sort, and obviously he had some really good ideas, and he had some things that were wrong with it. But then through his good sort of thoughts, made it better. Then go to my publisher. When he said yes, that was as big as my first ever deal, because I was so. And it was because I knew more about what the market was about. I knew how tough it was. I knew I'm an old fart writing a new book. Why bother? And it was a book, an old-fashioned book. Am I an old? So to be, and they've been Transworld have been brilliant. They've done a really good job on it, I think, and they've really given it. And my editor, Bill Scott Carr, can't say too many good things about. Just a really, really smart guy, really emotionally intelligent and really good at writing books, really helps you along. And so, I couldn't have had a better return, I don't think.
And also, I mentioned timing before, and obviously there's an argument that the first one came along at a good time. But, certainly I think looking at publishing as a whole, the sort of, to categorize it in a, sort of techno-thriller sort of story has gone slightly out of fashion as well.
Yes.
So that must have been slightly scary as well.
Well, I was very scared also because I have a belief that you should write about what you love, not write about what you know, but write about what you. Because if you can really excite yourself, you might find a few other people out there like you. Now it might not be. So I'm an ex-marketing guy, so I should do a cozy thriller. I should go out and find a way to find a way of how about a speculative cozy thriller, set in the year, but I just write my lane I love, and I do this thing. And you're right, though. There was a definite sense that it was in the wrong direction. And it still might be. I think what may have helped a bit is the fact that Trump getting elected and all this thing about climate change and genuine dystopian angst. It might be the wrong book to have, because it increases that. Sometimes you want the cozy thriller because you can go, la, 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 I'm going to read something nice.
Yeah.
But I still think, because I write, what it gets me out of bed to write is the element of something that is really exciting and fun, but within it there are some intellectual, some ethical, and some sort of meaning calories in there, which, because when you get halfway through it, let alone the reader, the writer, you get a bit like, why am I doing this again? And the why question is so important. Why are you doing this? And then if you can answer that question honestly for long enough to get you through it and get this thing done, there is a chance that someone else will go, yeah, I get it. And that's all I can do, I think.
Yeah, I think looking at your 7 books, I think that's a very neat way of summarising, I think, how, I guess, kind of summing up your approach to writing and the types of books that you like to write. Because I definitely kind of see you as a kind of Michael Crichton type author, like we could mention him already, but that kind of techno thriller, like high concept plots, fast pacing, but asking some real questions about issues and rolling in some actual basis on scientific fact, etc. That's kind of part of it, and that's kind of, I think, as Marco says, it does seem like that kind of story has fallen out of, and I don't know why that kind of story has kind of fallen out of fashion. It's, I mean, and there's people like Blake Crouch and stuff who are just still doing these kind of like sci-fi, fast-paced thriller stuff, but it feels like, it feels like a genre which I don't know why it's not as popular as it once was or should be.
Yeah, and I think it's also really hard to say what it is, because I mean,
I think maybe that's it, right?
I was in marketing, and I was like told, for what is the tip of your spear? What do you do? And cozy thriller, got it. What do you do, Mike? Well, I write these stories about speculative techno thrillers, which are kind of high concept and stuff. Yeah, but that's so general. What does that mean?
And
also,
actually, you can't sum up in a sentence.
Eight different lanes would fit into that description. And I'm not hardcore science fiction at all. I am a kind of, I mean, I think, what do the Americans call it? Ripped from tomorrow's headlines. But it's more this idea.
Exactly.
It's more about what could happen soon, and how does that inform what is happening now? I quite like that relevance of it.
Yes.
But that's a tricky one to do, because it's very easily dismissed as being either it's too science fiction-y, it's just fantasy, or it's too kind of too much hokum, and it's sort of airport thriller and stuff. And which I'm not averse to being read on a beach. Please carry on. I love all that. So, like I said earlier, my ambition was never to become a great writer, but to become a read storyteller. Yeah. And I think that these stories, my new one, for example, I'm writing now, is I think it's very timely, but it's very much about sort of what could happen, and it's every idea I have, I look out in the world and I go, yeah, it's happening. And you talk to people who really know about this stuff, and they go, yeah, you're a bit almost behind the curve, and you got to do this. Yeah. So I suspect, like all fashion, it will have its moment again. And I was a bit ahead of the curve on the Miracle strain. I mean, I was very successful and very lucky with it, so I'm very grateful. But if I'd probably had that out in just after the Human Genome Project, about 3 years later, it might have done even better. But I
suspect you're right there. I think
that's silly. It's so daft. You've got to just write what you're going to write.
Yeah, it's all exactly. It's all cycles. Everything comes back again. And as you say, I think writing the book that you want to write, that excites you, that comes across in the writing, that comes across in the final book, and that the reader feeds off that excitement, I think. And I think if you're writing something artificially to market, it's obvious, isn't it? Yeah.
Also, I'd hate to. The other core lesson I've learned is that it would be foolish, I think, to try and write for the market, which is really hard to do, not enjoy it, and then fail. Yeah. Rather than write what you love and have passion for it and do it you think quite well, and if it doesn't do as well, at least you've enjoyed the process.
Yeah, exactly.
Writing the story is part of the reading of it. It's kind of write a story that you'd want to read, basically. I suppose.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
It's not writing a book is it's not something you can do in a weekend, So
Yeah,
you
exactly.
may as well enjoy it, the process of it, and tell the story that
Absolutely.
you're actually interested in, and also chasing the market is just a fool's errand, really, because by publishing is so slow anyway, it'll be gone.
Yeah.
by
And everyone
the time
drives
it's
looking in the rear view. Everyone looking in the rear view mirror about what's just happened.
Yeah.
But actually, the ones that do, I'll get lucky, are the ones that tend to capture a zeitgeist that even they're not aware of sometimes.
Exactly. 100%.
So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a couple of times, obviously there was that break and you were working on the film side of things, trying to get something to happen there and things like that. I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about that experience, the good or bad, I guess. Yeah.
I can. Well, first of all, I must preface this by saying I'm incredibly lucky. So, I don't want to be that sort of cynical git who goes, well, I find it very difficult because, you get to Hollywood and stuff. I love Hollywood. It's fantastically exciting. You go out there and meet all these people who are really fun, weird, great. And some people I met there are some of the most venal and thick I've ever met, and some of the most wonderful and inspiring I've ever met. So I want to sort of first of all say, it's great. It's fantastically fun. And to be in the room is just such a privilege.
Yeah.
Having said that, it's just so arbitrary. I mean, that's the thing. I can tell you a kind of story, which sums it up really to me, how close you can get and yet how far you can be away. Crime Zero, my second novel, bought by sort of and by a company they just left New Line Cinema. We sold some to Disney, big company, some to Warner Brothers, big company, but with some we've sold to sort of people who were a production house who had links with and first look deals. Anyway, one of them had got Crime Zero, and we got to a screenplay that I don't think was great, but it showed you how the film of the book would look. So it was kind of a good first step. And we had apparently, according to the film producer who lived in London, sadly she passed away last year, but she had got the interest of Robin Wright, as in the film actress and wanted to become director and, a certain power in Hollywood. And Crime Zero, which is primarily about sort of how you could use genes to cure men of violent crime and create sort of a new brand of human. How far would you go and should you go? And if women were in power, what would they do about the sort of addressing the patriarchy and stuff? Anyway, I had a screenplay which was looking quite good. She was quite excited. A lot of big female actors were apparently lined up to have a look at this thing because of this is just about the Me Too movement, because this is relevant. And they're kind of going, this is great, we can do something about this. It's quite an empowering storyline. And literally on the day when Eileen Maisel is flying out to Hollywood to speak with the people who will be dealing with Robin Wright, I walk in my park. I live near Twickenham Film Studios, and I see the woman who ran it then, and she said, I've had the most awful morning, the most weird morning. I've had Ridley Scott running up and down the corridor going, I'm going to get that XYZ spacey because of whatever. And I go, oh gosh, what's going on? And she explains the fact that the news had broken then about Kevin Spacey, whether all the rights and wrongs of it, I don't know, but that had done. And then Ridley Scott went and recast him in All the Money in the World with Christopher Plummer, and all that story was all the big story. But in my little world, that meant that night I got a call from my producer saying, Robin Wright's people have just said, Kevin Spacey's been fired from House of Cards. I am now the tentpole, as in Robin Wright. All projects are off the table, can't look at anything. Now, I'm not saying that mine was her next one to do, but it was one of the slate of things that could have happened. And then, so you're in the room, and suddenly the door's closed, and it's like, next time. And one thing I have learned is that when it goes cold, it's dead. It's not perhaps next week they'll do something. No, something new and shiny will come along their way. So that was, to me, there was that moment, and one moment when Lucifer, when I was in San Francisco, and Tom Cruise was apparently looking at Lucifer, my third novel, or fourth novel, I forget which one now. And we were walking around San Francisco on cruise control thinking, gosh, you might actually do this thing. Then, of course, it gets close, but no cigar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm now. So now I go. Yeah, we've had loads of people. People ask me now, in your new book, have you had interest? Yeah, we've had interest. We've had people ringing up. I've had Zoom calls with people in Hollywood. But has anything happened? I'm going to say nothing because I've learned that until something is signed, and even then,
until the cameras are rolling on it. Yeah.
Which is why I love writing books again, because I came back to writing novels, is that you live or die by your own words, and that's fine. You know.
Yeah. Has that put you off the experience entirely then, or
no? What has put me off is that what I think got into my head was I was offered the opportunity and paid to write a screenplay for one of my books. I suspect I'd rather write a screenplay for one of your two books than mine, because it's not mine. It's like a tailor would say, to do a new jacket than alter one, because I'm my own worst. You know, I can't kill all my darlings, you know, whereas I can kill yours, Tarek and Marco, because they're not mine. And I could probably see the storyline clearly from a book than you could, and vice versa. You could look at mine and go, well, why didn't you get rid of that, Mike? Well, I like it. But so it's put me off getting too involved. I think Ernest Hemingway famously said, you drive to the border of California, you turn the car around, put your boot up, get your manuscript, chuck it over the border, they chuck the money at you, and then you drive off again and do nothing about it. And I think there's probably it's quite a sane approach. Just let the professionals do what they're doing. Yeah. Don't get too, in my case, and also when I wrote my screenplay, I was okay, but I realized it's very difficult, particularly off your own work. I found that was tricky. And I read all the books about it, William Goldman's stuff about how he wrote his own books into screenplays. And I thought, no, it's tough. Don't be too cocky. Do what you do really well and do that. Yeah. If you do other thing, get paid loads of money to learn it, fine. But otherwise, be very careful about that, I think.
Yeah.
Have you tried to go back down that screenplay route with either like original works or adapting other people's works? Is that something you? I have
got an idea. No, I have got an idea for it, because I do think, and I'd be careful how I say this, because the old line about "I'm sorry I wrote you such a long letter, I didn't have time to write you a short one" is very true, in the sense that I think with Final Draft you can actually mechanically write lots of stuff very quickly. Yes. And you could write, arguably, a bad screenplay really fast. Mm-hmm. A bad novel can take a long time. Yeah. Still, you got to write the damn things. Yeah. And you got to structure it. Whereas Final Draft does a lot of the sort of housekeeping for you.
Yeah.
So I have thought about, and two or three ideas I've had, and I've thought about doing that. But when I got back into Manhattan Down and writing that, and when I'm writing now, I realized that your front foot is that, and I think I should do that. And if there's a down period, I'll get a really good idea and I can scribble something out. Yeah. But I'm not so arrogant to think that actually that gets a decent screenplay. You don't have to work on it. I know people who write screenplays who work on it more times than doing a novel in terms of getting it right, because it is so short. Every single thing has got weight, Whereas in a novel, you can be a bit more discursive. When a screenplay, you kind of can't. Yeah. So I'd like to do it, but I'm wary.
We've had a couple of screenwriters on the podcast, and the thing that I took away from it is that you have to kind of just get used to, you write lots of stuff and hardly any of it. You could write stuff for your whole career, never get made, and you would make money out of it because people will pay you for the screenplay. But
I know people make very good money. It'll never be seen on screen. Have I seen any you've written? No.
Yeah. So it's
folk in like writers' rooms, who kind of never have a name in a script or anything at all, but just help out in the background.
Yeah.
It's a strange thing. So you are Manhattan Down out now. You're working on this next one. I don't know how far you are into that one. I mean, do you just plan one novel ahead? Is that all you're focused on at the moment?
I have other ideas, because what can happen, I find, is that if I get through the middle of something and I get a bit not stuck, but a bit like I want a breather, it's quite nice to do something else, but link to it. So then you go back to it again. But this one I'm focused on now, frankly, what I hadn't really appreciated was since Manhattan Down came out, there's been a lot of activity about it. So I've and that mentally is different to writing a book. So I found that tricky. So I've sort of told myself, just take a month or two off and do other stuff. and that's been quite helpful. But I'm really looking forward to going back to that now, because I don't know about you guys, but when you've writing every day or writing hard, you have to be right a lot to keep in the flow. But also, when you are forced to not do it for a bit, it's quite healthy, because you then really want to go back to it fresh. Yeah. So there's a bit of that. So I think I'm going to focus on this one. Also, because I've been lucky with this one, I've made a bit of gravy. I want to use the gravy to write the next one and hopefully get someone to go, oh, he's not dead. Let's get another book out there. Because it is, I mean, it is tricky coming back after 10, 11 years. And somebody to take you seriously.
It's almost like starting again, I guess.
It is, exactly like starting again.
Yeah. What was the last book that you read?
The one I read, I think, what was it? I read him in the wrong order. Bob Mortimer.
Oh, right.
Entirely off. See, I'm all over the place when it comes to my reading. I love everything. Bob Mortimer. I've got the Hotel Avocado. I'm halfway through the Hotel Avocado now, and I'm Robert Harris Precipice now.
Okay.
But I just finished recently. I reread Conclave because of what was going on.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that some time ago and liking it, and thought, oh, I wonder how close it is to what's going on. And secondly, another one I read was, I read his autobiography of Bob Mortimer's. Then I read the Jaffa Complex.
The Satsuma Complex.
Yeah, Satsuma Complex. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to say Jaffa. Yeah, no, exactly. So I really like all over the place, but I liked all those, and I thought they were, because Bob Mortimer, I think what he epitomizes the importance of voice, because when I read his stuff, whether it's his autobiography or his fiction, I can almost see him behind his desk on "Would I Lie to You?" and hear him telling one of his stories, and I find that really charming and very, very beguiling. And I don't really care where the story's going. I just love listening to it. And then he has also got story structure to it, so it's all good. So that's the last one I read.
My wife read the Satsuma Complex and said the exact same thing. She very much enjoyed it, I think, because it just sounds like him. You could hear his voice doing this.
Absolutely.
Voices and stuff as he's talking. So, yeah. Nice. What about the last film that you watched?
Okay, two films. The last one I watched was Warfare. The one before that was A Real Pain. Both about war, both entirely different. Yeah. All that war. The first one was about the Holocaust, but war was part of it. But Warfare was interesting because it had no context at all. It was just this, and I thought, that's brave. You write a story about guys, you get some vague idea of their mission, and they're in this house and they're being attacked and they've got to survive. And then you realize the old trope about you don't fight for your country, you fight for the person next to you.
Yeah.
And it was that writ large. And I thought that was quite a great, I really enjoyed it for that.
That's
visceral.
Alex Garland.
Yeah.
And it's
Garland
like a
and
super realistic recreation of an actual battle. Yeah.
It was Alex Garland, I think, was kind of he helped write it, helped direct it, but the core of it are the memories of a guy who was on this mission, and I think he kind of helps to translate it into the screen. So it's a sort of two-hander, I think. Okay. But really visceral. But then A Real Pain, I love for this sort of this handling tone, fantastically handling tone. Because how do you talk about tourists going to see Auschwitz, or some other awful, and just getting the tone right and the way into the story to the characters, so that it's not too there's so many words I could use, but it was I thought that was done really, really well as somebody who was sort of outside it looking in. I thought it was good.
And what about TV? What are you watching on TV at the moment?
I don't know about you, but I find it difficult to get time on my own to watch TV of my choice, because I have a wife and a daughter who both have very divergent points of view. So to get that lovely moment when you're all together going, it tends to be a kind of warm, lovely thing rather than necessarily a particularly challenging thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the one I did watch, and we all watched and found most meaningful, if you like, was and it's probably everyone says this, but the Adolescence miniseries with I loved that from so many levels. The one take, the whole manosphere business, and the whole that toxic stuff was all. I found that very affecting and done, and I used all the sort of clever thriller stuff of right in the action, visceral, but managed to get it very thoughtful. Managed to, yes, I thought that was masterful.
Yeah, I know it's a good thing, but I can't face watching. I have to say.
I
agree.
I put it off watching it for that reason, but then I did watch it, and I actually didn't think it was. I think I'd built it up in my head more than it was. It was. There's a few moments. The final scene is quite. It's very hard hitting at points, but it's not a grim, depressing watch the whole way through. It's almost, and it's as you say, the way they film it is incredible. Like the single take each episode. Sometimes it's going long car journeys, going through windows. And I was actually like, how? I actually don't know how they did that. And two,
but
the number of
mechanics, how do they
cast,
do it?
the mechanics and the cast having to be in the right spot for all this stuff. And the bit in the school with all the kids. I'm like, how did they organising that?
Imagine the one person who gets it
I know.
wrong. It's like, start again. take 87.
Oh, come on, Jesus Christ!
You got one line, just one line.
No, damn it! Shit. You'd be stressed. You'd be sitting there, but don't muck up this one. Just walk on, say it, and walk off. It's 45 minutes in now. We can't start again. No, that was a fantastic show.
I saw it, but I saw it with no expectations. I saw it very early on. It was one of those things of somebody said, "Oh, watch it, it's good," and then before the brouhaha happened afterwards, so I had no expectations, and I think I would easily have thought, no thanks, because it is, on the surface, quite a hard watch. But I think Tarek's right. At the end, there was a kind of a light to it. There was a kind of a hope in there somewhere that life does go on. Yeah. But it was but yes, I thought it was a virtuoso. The acting was excellent.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And almost like a play. It was so, but it wasn't closing.
Yeah, very much like a play.
Journeys, and it was fantastic. Yeah.
Right. Well, the very, very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and there's no right answer to most of these ones. Okay. But let's start off with Michael Crichton or Dan Brown.
Michael Crichton.
TV or cinema?
Cinema.
Night Owl or Early Bird?
It depends. Lark.
Okay.
And I get up really early normally if I've got something to do. Get out of the way. Yeah, early bird.
Okay.
Music or no music when you're writing?
Music, but I don't hear it. It goes after about. It just I don't know what. But I have it there. It's like becomes white noise. Even my favorite stuff becomes white noise.
Yeah. And the last one, let's go for paper book or ebook.
Paper book. I like everything about it, the smell of it, and also it's brilliant technically. It's got its own memory. It's very virtually indestructible. You've got to get a bookmark or folder tab, but it's got all the stuff there. It's great.
Fair enough.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Mike. That was great.
That was great fun.
Thank you very much indeed for having me. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much to Michael for coming on there. I really enjoyed that discussion. And, it must be quite daunting, even after the success he had in his early career, to have come back to novel writing after that big gap. And he must be relieved how the book has been received. So, we'll put a link in the podcast description so you can go and pick that one up if it sounds of interest. This is where I would normally tell you about who's on next week, but we have recorded so many guests recently that I'm not sure what order we're going to put them out, because we like to, if we can, we like to try and put them out as close to a publication date as possible. So that will require some juggling from me. It may even see some extra midweek episodes dropped at some point, but it all depends on my editing time, which is limited at the best of times, but we'll see how we get on. As I mentioned at the start, we do have our Patreon, so please do check that out. If you haven't listened to our Drafting Notes podcast, we do drop those. They're Patreon timed exclusives for a few months, but we do drop those on our main podcast feed as well. And they're more informal chats, I guess, between Tarek and I, focusing on one writing issue. We've been getting some lovely feedback on those, so if that sounds of interest, please do check those out. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on your favourite podcast app, as that helps us to continue to get great guests on the podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, give us that thumbs up and follow as well. That would be really, really good. If you want to get in touch with us, you can contact us on most social media at UK Page One, or you can send us an email at podcast@rightgear.co.uk. We'd love to hear from you. But otherwise, have a great week, and we will speak to you next episode. Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here, or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening, and join us for the next episode.
See you later.